Super excited to have our old buddy on. He's a senior NBA writer for The Athletic. Of course, you can hear him every Tuesday on The Athletic NBA show. He's been covering the league for 2 decades, according to his bio. He's the one and only Sam Amick. And Sam, before we get started, just to be clear, senior NBA writer. The senior is not because of your age or anything. I just want to, I just want to make sure
you are coming in strong. And Sam, can I just say, I love your hair too. I see that you did a new style to it. You are not looking anything like a senior, so don't listen to Deuce.
Okay, so that's
is there a way of cropping the video shot to get Deuce out? You know,
there we go.
Listen, Deuce knows his role with me. First of all, we're on the same wavelength. When I heard you say senior, I knew that's where your mind was going to go. Secondly, there's way too much gray happening. I'm going to the barber today.
No.
Keep the gray.
Embrace the gray. I think gray is a good look.
No, I'm just saying it's fine. No, okay. I'm okay with a little salt and pepper, but we're getting a little long.
Yeah.
Morgan, thank you on the haircut style comment. We basically decided to go back to 13-year-old Sam and part your hair and move it over. And
it looks good, Sam.
It seems to have worked. Lastly, I didn't know this was a prop, but just to lean into your accusations, Deuce, let me rock these. I did not have these when I started covering the NBA, I will admit.
Well, you've covered the league for a long time, and August is traditionally it's a dead month. And I know it's more quiet, but of course, yesterday, the James Harden video comes out from China was, it's so crazy that some of this stuff is becoming normal now, because that is a pretty crazy story for an NBA player on video to call the general manager of the team he's currently on a liar and saying he'll never be a part of an organization like that again. I was curious your first thoughts when you saw that video from James Harden.
This is a weird, unexpected response, probably a sense of relief, because, we were talking off air, just catching up a little bit about the summer and vacations. And so for our weird lifestyle, you do try to squeeze in vacations this time of year. And I'm not exaggerating. Every time our family goes on a trip, you kind of hold your breath that no big news is going to happen while you're away. Now, admittedly, the Athletic has got a deep enough staff. When I was at USA Today, it would feel like it doesn't matter if we're on a helicopter ride in Hawaii, I got to stop and write a story. The Athletic's a little different, but still, if this had happened last week when I was out, that would have added a little bit of angst to my routine. So the relief was kind of man, all right, I'm kind of getting back into work here. We got something to talk about. We got something to write about. The other takeaway was, if you go back to Saturday, I'm sitting around the house kind of, doing my thing, and ESPN drops that story about the Sixers taking James off the table in trade talks, and indicates that they want him to come to camp. The unanswered question in the story, and just being honest, as a reporter, when you read a competition's report, you look for different avenues to advance the story. So the natural question was, okay, that's nice, but how does James feel about this? So I make a few calls, get the answer to that, put out a piece talking about how James has no plans to play for the Sixers. In the interim, without sharing too much, all right, that story drops. Not any kind of crazy reaction from the parties involved to that story, but somebody had indicated to me well, you'll probably hear from Philly today. We'll circle back and connect. And I was a little surprised when I didn't. And then when the James video dropped, I was all right, I definitely don't think I am now, because they got bigger fish to fry. You don't see that kind of thing. And it's not lost on anybody that James is, in the middle of China saying what he said, with Daryl Morey's, sordid, complicated background with supporting Hong Kong and the NBA losing a lot of money because China got upset. So for James to say what he said about Daryl in China is a whole different layer to it. But it's obviously a pretty nasty dynamic here.
It's, drama filled. I was telling Deuce how, I love drama so much, especially when it's not associated with the team that I cover and everything as well. But there's also this side of me, the human side of me that's or even, I guess not even the human side, the NBA fan side of me that's I just want the best for these players. I want to see their talent on the floor, and I don't want to see all this crap keep them off the floor. So how do you think this one plays out with Harden and the Sixers?
I don't know. It feels like it might be headed toward unprecedented territory, meaning, a lot of Ben Simmons comparisons, right? Myself included in the story I wrote to the parallel between what the Sixers had a couple years ago with Ben. The obvious difference, excuse me, is, that James got 1 year left on his contract. Ben had 3, 4, I forget what it was. That's a major difference. So from a leverage standpoint, this is like you could teach a college course on like analyzing the leverage here, because James is an athlete who at 33 years old has got to pay attention to father time, conceivably still wants to win a championship. That clock is ticking. The idea of burning a season out of spite for the team that you play for doesn't make a lot of logical sense. So if you're Daryl Morey, you kind of count on that. Like there's no way he's just not going to play. On the flip side, I look at Daryl. I told somebody yesterday, Father Time is pretty friendly to front office people. Like Daryl, worst case scenario, this thing could cost him his career in Philly. He's still going to land somewhere else, make a lot of money. Those types of things are part of the calculus. And I think, to answer your question, Morgan, I don't know where it's going, but it's, James seems extremely dug in. There's CBA considerations to be, contextualized here and mentioned here, is that if he doesn't provide 30 days of service, at any given point, free agency will not be waiting for him in the summertime. If he doesn't play, he's not going to become a free agent. We have not seen that before. That wouldn't benefit Philly. And I'm admittedly kind of quoting our colleague and mutual friend, Bobby Marks of ESPN here, who had a good breakdown yesterday on it. That stuff matters a lot. If I had to pick one of the scenarios to handicap and say, this is where it goes, I have to imagine that, I don't know the timing, but that they find a way to get a deal done with the Clippers, because Philly cannot afford for Joel Embiid to be asking out, anytime in the next couple of months. And, I don't know, I don't want to highlight this if it's not factual, but did you guys notice this was making the rounds yesterday that Joel had taken Philly off of his Twitter handle? We all know in this day and age, that kind of stuff does actually matter. So, they got to find a solution here.
Yeah, that's where I was going next. The Embiid factor has to loom large, right? He's been through a lot in his time with Philly. There's just no way, if you're the Sixers, you can walk into this season with uncertainty when it comes to James Harden. You're trying to win a championship, one, right? And you're trying to maximize the years that Embiid has left at a prime level. He's coming off an MVP year. You're trying to win a championship. If you walk into the season with a Ben Simmons-like situation, you have to imagine Embiid's like, I don't want any part of this.
I would imagine that too. And I can tell you, last month before we jumped out on vacation, I wrote a bit about, those comments that Joel had made in that one conference where he alluded to the idea that he wanted to win a title, whether it was in Philly or somewhere else. So I write this column on Joel's comments, try to add a little substance to it. And honestly, it was one of those stories where I always kind of enjoy this, where you think you hit the mark and then the phone rings a couple times after the column comes out and you end up learning a little bit more. And really, admittedly, some of the pushback I got within the league on that column was that, okay, you mentioned that Joel for years has talked in Philly about wanting to be like Kobe, wanting to be like Dirk, Tim Duncan, the guys that stayed with their one team the entire time. That is something Joel has cared about in the past and probably still does to this day. But the consistent pushback I got was like, you went too broad with the scope of your context, because in the here and the now around the league, it's very much like people are going, all right, it's just a matter of time until Joel asks out, that he's pretty frustrated, and we'll see if that bears out. But if you're Daryl again and the Sixers, I don't know, either one of these scenarios might still lead to Joel being unhappy. You do a deal with the Clippers where he looks at what you get in return and doesn't feel like he's in a better position to contend than he was last season. He might be unhappy there. Or, of course, if James is MIA and you're getting nothing for a guy that was pretty darn good last season. So they're in, a pretty tricky spot.
Yeah. I feel like anytime it's with a guy to James Harden's caliber, like that tier of player, it ends up being tricky, right? Because of the star power, because of the money involved, because of the aging star. There's so many elements to it. But you mentioned the Clippers, and we already kind of know about their interest. But what is James Harden's market around the league?
I think it's pretty slim. I truthfully can't even spotlight one other team that is like waiting with bated breath to get him. Now, part of that is because the players are, in a situation like this, they are going to kind of frame their own storyline, so to speak. And he is the one who has made it clear that the Clippers where he wants to be. If that changed and they sent the word that he's open to other possibilities, then maybe, teams look at it. But you're talking about him being a rental, which is a major factor. You're not, it's not a Ben Simmons situation where you're going to get the guy for a handful of years. And then obviously he's a lot older than Ben. You're also talking about a guy that, despite his many accomplishments and his Hall of Fame resume, continues to be dogged by questions of passion for the game and competitiveness and teammate type stuff. Fair or not, this morning I'm scrolling through, my Twitter feed and Kevin McHale is just absolutely going in on James Harden on Sirius XM radio, his former coach in Houston, and calling him out for, back in the day when they'd have 3-on-2 breaks. And he says, when you look up and your teammate stops running and now it's a 2-on-2, that affects everybody. And, you got to remember, Kevin, you always kind of wonder about politics and relationships here. I'm sure Daryl has some people and friends in the league kind of in terms of messaging helping him right now. And who knows if that's the case with Kevin, but those questions linger for teams that might look at him. And, again, it's a small market, and we'll see if he can get where he wants to go.
The Clippers one's still interesting too, because it's like, okay, so you add Harden to Kawhi, Paul George, and Westbrook. I mean, what's that do?
Well, I mean, the Westbrook thing, even though it was actually a decent fit late last season, I still feel like the inherent nature of his contract is, excuse me, guys, still getting over the little bug, is that like not, I don't know, disposable is a terrible word, but like Russ is a gap filler,
right?
In that role. James is a significantly better player than Russell Westbrook. So I don't know what that would look like, but you got to upgrade from Russ to James if you can. And then you talk about the personal friendship and the dynamics in their history at Oklahoma City. Then I think they find a way to make that work. Russ obviously is going to be on an LA revenge tour until the end of his career because of how things went with the Lakers. So I would actually love to see it. That's the funny part, guys, of this summer for me, is I don't normally let like the basketball fan part of me come out like this in terms of what outcomes you want to happen. But basketball wise, there is admittedly part of me that's like, I would really like to see James in a Clippers jersey, and I would like to see Damian Lillard in a Heat jersey. These are fits basketball wise that not only would be fun to watch, but you talk about these two guys being up in age, and Morgan, you kind of alluded to this, like you hate to see their talents wasted a bit. I would enjoy seeing it, but we'll see if it happens.
So it's the Dame to Miami thing. Is that just inevitable at this point? Or do you think Portland's just going to dig in here and just like say, you know what, we're seriously going to wait for the best deal possible, and we can let this go right into the season?
I don't have a great pulse, admittedly, on it. I haven't re-engaged on that front since coming back from vacation. But I think the human component is always a major thing. So, you start getting closer to training camp. We've already seen both sides kind of flex with their voice a little bit, right? Like Portland has clearly said some stuff through the media to try to flex when it comes to how they're going to handle it. Fine. Damian, with his camp, with his agent, Aaron Goodwin, did that at different times, got checked a bit by the NBA when they're putting out memos indicating that, you can't send the message that you're not going to fulfill your contract. They both kind of flexed. They played that card. The next thing to me is, what does it look and feel like when you get to training camp? Is Damian going to just be peaceful, be, non-confrontational, if you will, and let it play out? Or is he going to get louder? Is it going to be uncomfortable? That's where it's hard, because him in particular, I mean, his character and his reputation and his personality are he's such a team first guy, and he's such a class guy that, I don't think he's going to stray from that. But his folks will tell you, he's also somebody of integrity and who believes that, I mean, it's a little bit like James. He clearly has a belief that the promises were made that, if this wasn't working out and you guys went down the rebuilding road, meaning the Blazers, that you would do right by me. And I certainly think in his mind, that's not happening just yet.
The drama. It's
every
You love
offseason.
it, Morgan, you love it.
I
You
know it's so bad. Sam, like it was funny because the other day when we were talking about this, I was like telling Deuce, I'm like, it's just like reality television. I love sitting back with popcorn and watching it. And then Deuce goes, no, it's like wrestling. You have Daryl Morey, who's like, the manager, and then you have James Harden cutting a promo in China. And I'm like, I'm just laughing how we both approach this type of drama. But I think the funnest thing about all this, Sam, the funnest thing is that it has nothing to do with the Sacramento Kings.
You got to knock on wood always.
I mean, and you have to knock on wood still. We're still in that stage where it's like, we're still, we're ready for anything. But at the same time, it feels like things are going well. And you talked to Monte McNair about a month ago with Slater, and it really seemed like he opened up to you guys too. That was the most I've ever seen from a Monte McNair interview, where he was like really transparent about certain things. What was one of the biggest takeaways for you?
I appreciate you saying that. I know you guys had Slater on, and I love that dude to death. And honestly, the interview that we did with Monty was a lot of fun. And I feel like I've done almost everything in this part of our industry, but having a three-way phone call like we did with Monty, where we, Slater and I have tried to figure out, like, all right, we don't have an every single day beat writer for the Kings at The Athletic. We do. I'm going to keep hyping our guy. Hunter Patterson is getting more and more comfortable and knowing more people and writing stories. And so Hunter's going to be involved, but we don't have a conventional beat writer on the team. So how, considering I live here and Slater lives in the area as well, how can we still provide consistent coverage? Well, we team up on it, right? Well, so then when we talked about doing this piece, and the Kings had shown a willingness to, have Monty talk, it just made sense to do it together. But I do actually think that it yielded in terms of Monty's insight and his candor, because there was just a back and forth where, we would go down a certain road on a certain topic with Monty, but, I might accidentally leave a little bit of meat on the bone, if that makes sense. And then Slater would kind of jump in and finish it off with a follow-up question. As far as takeaways, it's funny, Monty, for one, I know I keep giving more backdrop stuff, but like to see him get more comfortable with the media is fascinating, but he's just never, I don't think, going to be the most dynamic, like television personality presence. He is a thinker. He is a thoughtful guy. And throughout the course of this 45 minutes, it was challenging and almost, not to bring up a beloved old name with the Kings, but like Jeff Petrie-esque of an interview when you have to truly listen to what he's saying. Jeff would be very kind of doldrum with his tone, and before you know it, he'd say something kind of illuminative that would slip by you because you were going to sleep a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of that with Monty. And so I think we jumped on the right things. At the end of the interview, and we wrote it this way, when he talked about how one of the more underrated parts of their offseason was the way it set them up for the future. I think that I already kind of knew that from talking to Kings people, but the idea that that's actually something they were most excited about was not only, getting Sabonis on the long-term extension, getting Vezenkov, all these moves that were made, but that with Malik Monk coming up in free agency next summer, and then with, more importantly, the flexibility and the freedom to have the continuity of this team now, see how they play this season. And then if you want to go take a big swing, like they didn't this summer, that avenue is still open. Like it is a conservative, but intelligent, measured approach that, for my 2 cents, I think was a pretty smart way to go.
Yeah, he has a lot of patience.
Yeah.
Which, is not always easy for a general manager to have when you've got ownership, and there's going to be, we want to win, right? They want to put a winner on the floor. So there's going to be an immense amount of pressure, especially going into last season when they're trying to finally end a playoff drought. So it's very interesting, like how almost deliberate he is. Like, yeah, he could have gone out there and spent a ton of money trying to get one like a Kuzma out there.
Right.
He didn't do
But
that.
he's also really, Sam, I don't know if you see this too. He's really particular with the type of player that he gravitates to. And I think the type of player he gravitates to, there's something to do with the way their work ethic, their personality, or not even their personality, just characteristics that they have, that he knows that the coaches that he has in place can bring the most out of them. I think that's where he goes about it. And that's where his basketball mind goes. And that's where I just really appreciate his patience.
It's funny though, because I agree that he's patient, but what I have enjoyed about his, now few years long Kings career is that the defining moment was the exact opposite of patience. The trade to get Sabonis.
Yeah.
Was a calculated risk, but defined. You know what I mean? Like, and it was out of left field, and people didn't anticipate the idea of Halliburton not being a part of this team, and it was counterintuitive because when a guy is a young GM without the kind of footing politically, career-wise, to go out and take big swings. This is not Danny Ainge with years of track record behind him. To have a young draft pick in Halliburton where you could just you could be patient and say, listen, I know it's an uneasy fit with the Aaron, but at least I can tell my owner that I drafted well. You know what I mean? Like, that part was clear. You could have just kind of rode the coattails of Tyrese Halliburton in Sacramento for quite some time. And I think some other younger executives would have done that. But when he saw the kind of move that, and along with Wes Wilcox in that front office that they thought was going to advance the operation, they did it. So that hybrid of like patience, strike, and we've only seen it really once with a big move, has worked so far. And as long as you still have that avenue open, you're well positioned. You know what I mean? And continuity matters. I'm fascinated league wide this season to kind of monitor, the different teams that have varying levels of continuity. Phoenix will be a trip because you're talking about all that change, all that star power, lack of continuity, but they got some kind of experience under their belts last season. How does that benefit them this season? But Denver, raising the trophy with that slow, patient approach that they took all the way down the line. I feel like the league, I don't know if it's, 50-50 or 60-40, but it's kind of split, in terms of the continuity teams and the let's patch it together type teams. And right now the Kings are in the continuity club.
Yeah, and I feel like that it makes sense for them to have that approach because I just think there's so much, especially when you have cap space, it's easy to fall into let's just go spend the money and hurt your flexibility, and you might win the headline. That's my most irritating thing with sports is when organizations focus so much on winning the headline. And it's like,
right,
who cares about winning the offseason or winning the headline? You got to win games. And I think so many times in the past, the Kings have been faced with an offseason where they're like spending too much money on like a Trevor Ariza, Dwayne Dedman, Corey Joseph. The list goes on where, you can justify and go, hey, veteran pieces, but they weren't really smart moves. You might have had some good headlines in the offseason, but it didn't translate to anything. So I think their approach was right. The other thing, too, I think Sasha is going to be a nice fit for them.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, he's definitely not flying under the radar in Sacramento. But league-wide, I don't know that many people are talking about the fact that they were able to get him on draft night 2022 to get his rights for a second-round pick, and then a year later they bring him over. He seems like a guy that will fit just perfectly with this offense.
Yeah, that's another major local focal point for me. I'm excited to see that dude play because I'm not overstating this. I mean, the Kings, and I think they would say the same thing. They are hyping him a lot in the kind of way that typically you wouldn't see. Like, let's just let him get comfortable. They're very comfortable saying, you know what, we just worked for essentially an entire year to convince him to come. It's funny because free agency, and this relates to Sasha, free agency is not what it used to be as far as how teams pursue high profile players. We talk about Daryl Morey. It wasn't that long ago where every single summer Daryl would have these extravagant recruiting plans for Chris Bosh and for LeBron and for every single guy, right? Where, we're going to have props and we're going to fly to wherever you want us to go. That part has kind of changed. The Kings, under the radar, did some of that stuff with Sasha all year long. They, but in a more professional way. You're talking about going over and having meals with the man just so that he looks you in the eye and trusts you and starts to get to know you. You can then, this is Monty, this is Wes, this is, their whole bunch. Mike Brown going over there, Matina, Kolakatranis, even the business side. Let's talk to him. Let's let him know what's happening at our place. And we asked Monty, or I did, about the question of, with Sasha, you can't speak for him, you can't read his mind. But after you recruit for that whole time and you tell him, we think you'd fit in great and we think it's a place that's worth coming to, the loudest part of the recruiting pitch was the way they played on the floor. And the idea that, he was over there in Europe as a guy who, to me, it seems pretty clear, had seriously contemplated just being a European player for his whole career because he seemed comfortable. Culturally, we forget this element sometimes, guys. Like, the guys who were born and raised in that part of the world, they're not all dying to come to America. Nikola Jokic is only here because the NBA is the NBA. He cannot wait to get back to Serbia when his career is over. And that is the truth. And so Sasha, it seemed like he had some of that. So they just, months and months and months of recruiting Sasha. And then it all culminates with him, winning EuroLeague MVP. It seemed really interesting at the end in Eurobasket when they lose by such a close margin and he has a tough finish to his season that they were a little worried that he was going to have second thoughts and stay just because, that left such a bad taste in his mouth. But all those things leading to the fact that you now have a guy on a 3-year, $21 million deal that if he is who they think he is, might be one of the best value contracts out there next season.
So you bring over some shooting with Sasha. You have that continuity with bringing it back with some of your main guys and everything. What's your biggest question for the Sacramento Kings this season?
I mean, there's still two sides of the ball. You know what I mean? It's the defense. We do kind of forget, because their second half surge last season, was spotlighted the way it was with good reason. And then followed by the playoff berth, followed by pushing the Warriors. That the narrative of the Kings being awful defensively did fall by the wayside a bit. It didn't necessarily change. There were moments in the playoffs where you saw what they could be defensively. But, Mike Brown in year 2, his staff, his system, you would think and hope for their sake that it improves defensively. But in terms of personnel, you look at it and it's, I don't think Nerlens Noel is, maybe going to help here and there, but that's not a fixer in terms of rim defense, length and versatility on the wings. Harrison Barnes, I like the contract. I like them bringing him back. But, he is a year older and defensively all the way up and down the line. I mean, De'Aaron, for example, in the playoffs, it was so much fun to watch him get after it defensively, but you can't kid yourself. He's not doing that for 82 games. He just can't. So that to me is the biggest thing. It does make me think though about something that I think it was Wes Wilcox who had shared this with me because he worked with Mike in Cleveland, was the general idea. I apologize. This was Monty talking about the head coaches he had been around, that year 2, year 3, year 4, that we don't talk a lot about the evolution of coaching staffs and the impact that they have on their group, that, having a year under your belt is a big deal. Mike D'Antoni in Houston, got better the longer he was there. Now Mike was a veteran coach by the time he got to Houston, had done a lot, but, just being around those players another year and those humans and having more trust and more connectivity, I think matters too. So the defense though is the biggest question.
We've got more with Sam Amick coming up in just a second, but we should mention that today's podcast presented by our friends over at ESAC Fitness. Morgan, I know you're even noticing.
Myself? I know. Thank you.
No. Baby got back. Deuce Mason.
You?
Yeah.
You want me to talk about your butt?
Squat City, baby.
Oh, okay.
It's all because ESAC Fitness.
That's why.
Consistent going to ESAC Fitness. You should check it out if you're looking for a new gym because they have a ton of space. Great classes. Functional fitness, spin, yoga. They've got a recovery room that Morgan likes that has a sauna.
Oh my gosh. And a cold plunge. I am so excited to recover every single time that I work my ass off in this gym. So if you're looking to get your summer workout on, make sure to go to ESAC Fit.
Go to esacfitness.com. Also presented today by a New York Times bestselling author, the one and only T.R. Reagan.
I can't even with her. If you're going on vacation, these are the books you need to read. You will binge all them. It's like binge watching a show this summer, except you read them. And you can also do what I do. I actually love the audio versions of these books. So when I'm on a plane or I'm just chilling outside or I'm even doing some things around the house, I just shove it in my ears. I love T.R. Reagan's books. So if you're looking for a thriller where you can't even sleep at night because you're going to have so many nightmares, make sure to go to trreagan.com or search TR Reagan on Amazon.
The most bizarre King stat from last year, their defensive rating on the road was 8th in the NBA. At home, 29th.
Right.
It's bizarre to me. I don't know how to even explain that. Like, it
was so weird for them to have the locals like content with them. They let their guard down.
I don't know. They get caught up in the moment, trying to hit shots. It's such a weird thing to think about. I'm curious if they can make a bit of a jump in year two. And they don't even have to make a crazy jump, I don't think either. I mean, Denver was 15th in defensive rating last season. They won the championship.
And we keep going back to that continuity and how the league is kind of leading in that direction or all moving in that direction. And you look at this team build together. You know this, Sam. It's like if you can create this team defense that knows how to make things work together, sure, there's going to be matchups that are hell for you when it comes to a big or a team that their shooting abilities just like out of this world. But at the same time, there's something to being able to build that together, to trust each other that can really come together and hopefully push them to more of the middle of the pack this season.
Well, and that's where it's going to have to be. Like that team defense reference, Morgan reminds me of, we talked earlier about Daryl Morey and the Kevin McHale thing. In that same McHale interview, he actually talked about Larry Bird as a team defender and was comparing Larry to James and making the point that James could be a good team defender. He just chooses not to be. Larry was a good team defender. The Kevin Huerters of the world. I mean, Harrison is not a lockdown individual defender. He's mostly a team defender. Like that across the board, more of that from Mike and his staff, and then again, figuring out the delegation of duties with the backcourt, I think is tricky because, Fox as the head of the Snake defensively was such a good look in the playoffs. I don't know how you replicate that in the regular season to kind of load manage because you're just going to have to. But we'll see. I think, like you hit it earlier, they don't have to be top 10. Try to get in the top 20. Where did they finish last year overall?
24th.
24. Yeah. I mean, if you're being realistic, if you're Mike Brown, you're saying, I mean, if you're getting aggressive, you say, let's get top 15, but truthfully, like top 18, just because that offense is going to be dynamic. And De'Aaron, and I'd be shocked if I'm wrong about this. Like, I just don't know how I'm not saying he has to play like he did in the playoffs every night, but I think he's going to come back a different person, a different player. Because, we can't forget how last season around this time, he entered facing so many questions about his competitive spirit, about is he worthy of the contract? Is he a franchise centerpiece? And, for him to go out and answer those questions the way he did, I think the momentum will probably continue there too.
It seems like they're really high on Keegan Murray too, to take a significant step. And I don't know if that's year 2. I don't know if that's year 3, but they seem pretty excited about his upside.
Absolutely. It's crazy that we got this deep into it and we haven't even talked about Keegan. It's funny because I think Keegan's going to be fascinating because I'm a little bit in the camp of like, all right, I'm sorry, like Summer League is always just Summer League. I don't care if you score 80. You know what I mean? So we'll see. Like I loved, Luke Laux coaching the team. He had such a great quote about Keegan, and I'll probably botch it, but it was the one about Baskin Robbins and how like last year Keegan was vanilla and it tastes fine and it's sweet and you enjoy it. But then this year there's some color in there and little couple different flavors and he got some shimmy in his game. So like to see Keegan try new things at Summer League was for them, I think, very, very exciting. But now, I mean, if he could go out and replicate the exact season he had last year, that would be hard. You know what I mean? Like hitting that many threes. And so, of course, he's trying to advance. And within that, I mean, another subplot that I think will be fascinating to watch is the way that Mike Brown handles his rotations. And like Kevin Huerter is to me another guy we're not talking about a lot because he was a really important part of last year, struggled in the playoffs. For my 2 cents, I think you just continue supporting him and don't pull him out of that. Don't give him a smaller piece of the puzzle this year just because of the playoff struggles. I think he's a guy that I've seen fire from him. The way he left Atlanta, you could tell that he felt like, they just didn't value him the way they should have. And I always like it when a guy, kind of doesn't forget, because you can tell that he has a certain vision for himself and his career that maybe, others don't see it. So I think he's, a big piece of what they're doing. But, if you give, so much to Keegan, where do you take it from? How does Mike handle, that aspect, I think is interesting too.
Yeah, the other thing with Kevin Huerter that doesn't get talked enough about, he's still young too. I know he's been in the league for a minute, but he's like 24, 25 years old. So he's another young guy. But yeah, you're right. It's going to be interesting to kind of see how they balance it. I mean, you got Malik Monk likes to get shots up too. How do you have that offensive balance?
Sasha, I mean, you have these guys that like to shoot the ball, but they also understand that, hey, short leash if you're not playing the offense the right way, except for De'Aaron and Sabonis probably get, the freedom. But the rest of the guys, it's like, make sure you are making this amount of passes, you're running through this amount, you're cutting this amount of time, whatever that may be. I'm excited for it. And I know this might sound a little biased, Sam, because we just talked to him, but Davion Mitchell, I hope that guy, his shot that he's been talking about, that he's been working on all this offseason, and I know we have to see it to believe it, but we see these guys labeled as just defenders in this league. Jared Vanderbilt with the Lakers, he was played off the floor in the playoffs as well. And with Davion, I just hope he can form some sort of shot that can keep him on the floor at times especially when they need that backup point guard.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's a guy that we saw in the playoffs again where he can help. I mean, if you're him, you're sitting there with a defensive calling card, among a group that just doesn't have any players who can say that. I mean, that's obviously where his value is. With him offensively, and especially with Mike Brown having his long history with Steve Kerr and the Warriors, what comes to mind is that, yes, improved shot would be fantastic, catch and shoot stuff where you're not slowing the offense down, but he's gotten a little better with his handle and with his penetration ability. But to me in the playoffs, it was one of those, like Steph Curry talks about the 0.5 seconds decision, like make up your mind. And Davion would slow it down a little bit at times where it's almost reminiscent of, Keegan and Summer League where he's experimenting, but like you can't experiment in playoff basketball, really regular season basketball, when you have a role like Davion. So that's the part where I don't envy his offensive challenge, because, you've got, when you're a high prospect whose talents are on the offensive end, you're going to have the freedom, and that window is this big to try things out. Davion, it's just the window is this big, and it's hard to improve when the window's that big, if that makes sense. But hopefully he pushes it in the right direction.
So last year they were the 3rd seed in the West. The West was weird. I feel like the West is weird again this year. I don't know how many teams I truly trust at this point. Denver, of course, you trust. We've talked about them on the pod. Where are you at with the Kings? Like, where do you think they kind of stack up right now in the West?
I mean, now I feel like I got to put the old
take a look. Take
a good old look, Sam.
I got to cheat. I'm going to see. You know what time of year it is when I bet you I'm going to open the NBA app.
Yeah.
And this happened the other day. I tried to look at something, and it told me to log on. So you've been out for a while.
Oh, he's getting back from vacation.
But I was just trying to peek at the standings to give me a little visual reference. All right, here we go.
I always do that.
I mean, who do I trust? Phoenix is loaded. They're going to win a ton of games. You know what I mean? Can't wait to see Bradley Beal in that group. And I do think he's going to fit well. So
you trust them though?
I mean, to win the whole thing, no. But do I trust him as a
to
West
be good?
contender?
Okay.
No. I don't trust the Clippers because of health.
Sure.
I like Memphis this summer. I think Marcus Smart is literally like, you could scour the entire league for what they needed in the wake of the John Morant situation, and he might be top 3 on my list, and they happen to get him. So I like that move. I like where Memphis. I think they're going to have a lot of reasons for motivation. The Warriors are going to be hungry. I mean, you're talking about their final crack at it, really. They're not getting younger.
Do you believe though in the? Do you believe in the Warriors?
The fit with Chris Paul.
Are they the We Believe Warriors? Yeah. If I believe in the Warriors, I'm trying to think of it by saying, like, what do I not believe in? I mean, I think I do.
Okay.
Again, we're not talking title winners. But I think what I see from their humans, and I think the 3 of us are kind of like-minded, where you try to just look beyond the X's and O's. Steph does. I mean, let's compare. This is not fair, but let's compare Steph to James Harden.
Okay.
James doesn't have any championships, and if you could somehow magically read someone's mind and quantify hunger for a trophy, I think Steph's is significantly above James's, despite the fact that he has 4. You know what I mean? So Steph, he's still out there with this chip on his shoulder, pumping out the movie, Underrated, whatever it was called. And Steph's head is in a good place. Clay, I hope he doesn't look well. Who cares? If he looks at our website right now at The Athletic, he'll see that he just got put by our Seth Partnow in tier 5 of the players in today's NBA.
Ooh.
So, the perception of his stock continues to be, I guarantee you, significantly lower than how he sees himself. So the point I'm getting at is motivation. Draymond comes in with his $100 million deal and getting kind of reconfirmed as a voice within the Warriors. Love him or hate him, as Mo sits here rolling her eyes. And we'll see. Why am I blanking on? They just added
Chris Paul.
Chris Paul, that guy.
Chris, yeah. I was skipping over Chris.
Okay.
I was somehow focusing on Saric. Saric gives him a little shooting. The Chris Paul thing. All right, now you have me on the do you believe? I don't know, man. Like,
see, that's
hilarious.
the thing. That Sam, I'm with you when you talk about the motivation factor, because even I was telling Deuce the other day, I was like, we heard those conversations, or Clay was saying, like, me, Chris, Steph, Draymond, we're in a text, and we're all motivated, and so I was kind of feeling like, okay, they're building that chemistry. They want to get Chris Paul a ring, maybe like because he's on their team wearing their jersey now. But at the same time, I'm like, basketball wise, I just don't see it.
Okay, tell me. I kind of do. Sorry, dropped the old man glasses. Basketball wise, I think I do see it, because Jordan Poole was just not an effective leader of their second unit. He played with the ball too much. He was not a natural playmaker. You talk about the 0.5-second decision-making, Jordan was cut different, and he was a Jamal Crawford type leading that second unit. When they added Chris, of course, everybody talked about the stats with the Warriors and the idea that they run, less pick and roll than anybody in the league. And then acted as if that was a reflection of why Chris was a bad fit, when in fact, and agree or disagree, like, it was actually a calculated choice internally to change something, and more specifically Steve Kerr, to change something that he didn't like basketball wise about the way they functioned. Mm-hmm. He wanted more pick and roll coming from the second unit, and part of that is that we all know how great Steph is off the ball. So in those minutes, when Chris and Steph are playing together, they can do some of that. It's a different look. And really the second unit, think about the first half of last season with the Warriors. They're dropping all these road games. Yeah. It was just bonkers how they couldn't win on the road. And when you looked at their plus minus splits from the first unit to second unit, the first unit was literally one of the best, if not the best, in the league for the first half of the season. And they had a terrible record. Like, it was all about the second unit being awful. So I do think, health permitting, which is a major, major qualifier, Chris Paul is not that far removed from some, fantastic basketball.
So,
where
you're saying though, because I'm with you with the passing ability, the vision. Like I agree with what he's capable of doing on the floor. But you keep saying second unit. Like we're putting him with that second unit. Like he's coming off the bench for sure.
Maybe he's staggered though. Maybe he starts and he gets staggered.
I mean, yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
I just did the old, our friend Kendra Andrews, assuming.
Love her. Are you the coach? Are you the coach?
Chris is gonna watch this video and be like, "Damn, Sam, I'm coming out." I was in the room, by the way, when that happened, and she handled it great. And if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, it was Chris's first Warriors press conference, and I mean, I like a little, what's the word? Like, I'm fine with a little flair, and he wasn't disrespectful, but it was a funny moment where she just said, how you feeling about coming off second unit? And he says, you the coach? And that's Chris in a nutshell. It was, admittedly, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but man, it was hilarious for me to see the reactions of the Bay Area media reporters, because I've dealt with Chris. I met Chris. Let's see, it was before his first preseason game for the then Hornets in New Orleans. They played, I think it was in Norman, Oklahoma. So it was, they'd been displaced by Hurricane Katrina. And I mean, I got Chris at the very beginning and learned very quickly when he was 19 or whatever he was, like that this guy, just had a little edge to him. And he's always been fine to deal with, but like, he doesn't just let questions slip past and give you stock answers. And so the Bay Area media, when he shot back at Kendra a little bit, including our guy, Mr. Slater, they kind of were smiling a little bit like, man, all right, so this is the Chris Paul experience, that's how he is. I don't know the outcome of whether he's going to start, whether he's not going to start. Whatever it looks like, he's going to spend a fair amount of time with both units. My argument would be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it with the starting five. Okay. And Chris could be dynamic coming off the bench. And, we've seen plenty of veterans who have to learn the hard way that you might need to compromise. I was in the room when Carmelo Anthony, I was in Oklahoma City when I think it was, Eric Horn, who I used to work with at The Athletic, Oklahoma City reporter, asked Melo about being a six man. And that's when he says he sees Paul George walk in the back of the room and he says, "Yo, P, they talk about me being a six man." And he's laughing it up, So Melo took a while to accept that role. Russell Westbrook took a while. I don't know what the Chris experience will look like, but I do think he can help him.
I was just thinking about this whole dynamic too, because you mentioned the chip on the shoulder. I was listening to Klay Thompson on Paul George's podcast, and I feel like now off-season player podcasts are like off-season mixtapes. You see like Gobert launching threes and knocking them down. Hey man, if Gobert knocks it down, I get sucked into player podcasts. I'm listening to Klay and I'm like, I start to believe he's going to have a great year. But I did the same thing last year when I heard Ben Simmons on JJ Redick. I was like, dude, I think Ben Simmons may be an all-star again. It's weird how those things can sway me, but yeah.
Did you hear this as an aside, just for fun, levity? Did you hear the fun one? This was my favorite, was D'Angelo Russell went on Patrick Beverley's podcast and tried to push back on an interview that he and I had where he talked about feeling, how do you phrase it? That he was held back in Minnesota. So we had talked after a game in the playoffs, and I had told him that I was curious about how he reflected on the Minnesota time. But his version of the events to Pat was, man, this reporter was hanging out like, 4 different games trying to get me. I could tell he had an agenda. I never said that I was held back. And then he proceeds to tell Pat why he felt held back, which I thought was very.
Oh, wow.
But I'm here for it. Yeah. Like these player pods.
I love it.
They teach you things about guys' mentality, and it's a different look. I mean, there's space for all of it, man. Like I love that stuff. So it's all good.
One last one for you, Sam. I'm curious how you feel about the new in-season tournament that the NBA is going to be rolling out this year, and also if you've had a chance to even, I know, kind of popped up, I guess, during Summer League, but any indication from like players or coaches, execs, how they're feeling about it?
I don't have a great sense there. I'm a little guilty of like, I don't know why it is, like changes like that, I kind of wait till they arrive to wrap my head around exactly what I think. I mean, the play-in tournament was met with great skepticism, and I think it should be remembered that that was the case, and that ultimately it turned out to be a pretty good thing. I at the same time, I'm not a big soccer guy, right? But I know enough about it to know that some of the criticism that does make sense to me, including one person who comes to mind is our Marcus Thompson, had shared his opinion on this. Like, the massive distinction or difference between the way European soccer handles an in-season tournament and this one is that that tournament gives you a chance to play teams outside of your league, and it's new blood, it's new matchups. So if you're going to have an NBA in-season tournament where the Grizzlies are playing the Spanish team, that's incredible.
Yeah,
well, that's what this is. It's the same people. It's like it's like you're just changing the software. Oh, don't forget, guys, this one counts more. Like when you wake up in the morning, you're supposed to be wired differently because you were informed that this game has different stakes. Not only that, but the ebb and flow of the schedule and how you could be playing on a Tuesday and it's a regular season game, and now 2 days later this one counts for the in-season tournament. It's just a little funky. The fans who hate it and who have concerns, I would say be patient with it, because I did at Summer League talk a little bit to Evan Wash, is one of the NBA's people who has a lot to do with it, where he had indicated, like, generally speaking, that they are open-minded about changing in the future. So if it flops a bit this year, there's going to be maybe a different purse for the players, maybe a different this, different that. The tweaking is going to continue, I think. So we'll see where it develops.
I like it. I think it may take time to grow for sure, and it's going to evolve for sure.
Make the tweaks, yeah.
We all know early in the NBA season, it's hard to get fans involved, and maybe Tuesday and Fridays have a little more meaning. And then damn well, if the Kings made it to Vegas for that little single elimination thing, people would be pretty amped
this
up
market would be amped
for the
up.
NBA Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm down with it.
The Vegas thing is another layer to this, obviously. To go from Summer League, where you see the Wembanyama mania, to the announcement about the in-season tournament and the G League Showcase in December and what that's become, and the WNBA All-Star Game and the Aces and how successful they are. At Summer League, I went to Adam Silver's press availability at the APSE conference out there, and more than ever, he just sounded like a guy that when he talked about Vegas and expansion, that it was a matter of when, not if. The whole Vegas thing, this is just another way for them to push their league in that city, because they've decided that it's a successful partnership there.
Give me Vegas and Seattle. I think that's next.
Let's go.
That's next. Well, Sam, seriously, thanks so much for all the time, dude. Enjoy the rest of the offseason as much as you can. Season starts a little bit later. I think media days are like
October
1st-ish or something. So
a
week later.
30th of September is training camp. Starts, but we're getting there. But slow down. We don't need to be there yet.
Yeah. Chill. Let's chill.
Enjoy the time with the fam, and thank you so much, man.
Of course, guys. Always appreciate you.
That's the one and only Sam Amick.